Oh. It's one of those funny things, and maybe you can relate to this. I started this show about 4 years ago, and just something on the side for fun, and it took on a life of its own. Maybe to jump into it, that makes me wonder, does Ultra have a similar thing in your life? Because I know you started off as a DJ yourself, and
yes.
you were doing the DJ thing. You had residencies at influential nightclubs all across the country. You were known in these circles as a performer, as an artist. When you started branching out from that, was that a conscious choice? Was it you trying to make a change, or was it one of those things where it sort of snowballed and became something else over time?
Yeah, life for me is kind of like in two parts. There was life before Ultra, and you're right, I was DJing, and this was, pre-internet pretty much, touring DJ, mostly in America. It was going from, club to club, as all the touring DJs do, mostly New York, Miami, for the most part, Montreal, LA, San Francisco, Chicago. A bit all over the place in the US, but I always, as much as I love DJing, I always had my feet on the ground, and I always craved stability. So I always had an ear for music, but I was more of a day person and just loved having a stable job. So while I was DJing, I started off being like, buzz chart editor for Mixmag magazine when it was in the US. I was running their label called DMC. I did promotions for an independent label called Emotive Records. All these kind of little things. I always had I didn't know which was the side job because I was doing both kind of at the same time. I guess it started off as DJing, running a record label. But before that, I was kind of running nightclubs, actually, as a promoter and a manager. And then I slipped into doing DJing.
So if we work back from there, from DJ to promoter, was dance music a part of your life at a young age? I would have to assume so.
Yeah, I think I kind of got bit by the house music bug maybe when I was 18, 19. I think it was probably like in the early days of like Jungle Brothers and Todd Terry, very early music. And when I was in college, we used to book a young DJ called Hex Hector, who actually went on to become a Grammy Award winning, I think it was in 2001. He won the Grammy for I Turn to You by Mel C, his remix. And so we used to book him at our college parties. And in between, we always wanted to play hip hop, and in between the hip hop, he'd be playing house records. And I was like, oh, this is kind of cool. But it wasn't really my thing until I started getting into it more and more. And then I discovered Limelight and all these kind of Palladium and all these nightclubs in the very, probably late 80s, early 90s.
And this is in New York, right?
This is New York, yeah. So I'm a city kid, raised up, grew up in Brooklyn. Not New York City was my backyard. So I grew up in the nightclubs in New York City, and I just always wanted to be a part of the music somehow. I found my way into doing my own parties, and I started at Limelight, doing a small party there, then moved on to the Palladium and just kind of started as a promoter. But I moved more from promoting into managing because I was offered a job managing a couple of nightclubs from this owner called Peter Gation. And Peter Gation owned the Limelight, Palladium, Club USA, and the Tunnel. And these were all mega clubs in New York City, each one holding between 2,000 and 5,000 people and jumping every night of the week. And so he had his kind of crew of managers, and I was managing one of the managers at Club USA in the Tunnel at the time. I don't know. I was more into the music and less into the management in the nightclubs because, there's a dark side to running nightclubs, especially back then. It was pre, Instagram and pre all the social media. So it was a little bit of a darker time.
Well, and for anybody listening who doesn't know who Peter Gation is, there's a story there as well, And
I was in it. I was in the middle of it during the pinnacle of his career in New York City. And there's a great book that he just came out. And there was also a video documentary called Limelight. It's interesting to hear the stories from back then. Yeah.
Well, I wonder, I think that period gets so romanticized, and there have been movies made about it, and, all these sort of passed down legends about how crazy it was and this sort of unmatched feeling and vibe and atmosphere. As someone who was really there, is that accurate? Did it really feel like sort of this just sort of wild time that there hasn't been since?
Sure. Well, I remember when I was a manager at Club USA, we'd have clients that came in that were just always talking about the days of Studio 54. And they're always like, oh, well, it's not the same. And I don't want to be that guy saying it's just not the way, it's back in the day and it's not the way it was, it's not the same. But it was an interesting time, especially for New York nightlife with, we were spoiled back then because we had all the iconic DJs playing regularly at every nightclub, whether it was Wednesday night, you'd go to see Lil Louis Vega. Saturday night, you go see Junior Vasquez. Sunday night, you go to see Frankie Knuckles, and Roger Sanchez and Masters at Work and all the iconic DJs, the legends, were all just residents at the local clubs. So you kind of got spoiled listening to the most incredible and pure house music back then. So it was definitely good times, but there was a decadent side too, and between the Michael Allig, the club kids, and there are a lot of stories from that are all true. They're all very accurate. All the stories that you read and documentaries you see, it's all very true. And it was an interesting time for New York nightlife.
Yeah. I mean, what a time to just be there and to be young. And, I think that kind of experience, I mean, it's interesting. And I'm sure you've seen this to connect it to what you're doing now, even with, say, younger artists that you work with on the Ultra label. It's so different now from when it was, just the club environment, the performance aspect, the politics of it, all of it is so different and so much more above board in many ways. Yes, I guess if you look back, is there anything in today's club culture or the way the dance music business is running now that you miss from the old days?
That I miss? No, I mean, you got to embrace the future. You have to really evolve with it, or else you're just going to get left behind. So, I don't miss, I miss going to the record stores on Tuesdays and finding that gem of a record that no one can find. And I remember, there was this one remix that I found. There was a record that Junior Vasquez was playing on Saturday nights at the Sound Factory, which is a legendary nightclub that soon after became Twilo, that I became resident at that club. But this was in the early 90s. And it was a David Morales remix of the Thompson Twins. And it was one of these records that he played it. You couldn't find it anywhere. I had a hard time finding it myself. And it took about 4 years to actually track down this record. And a friend of mine who happened to be in Italy at some random record store happened to find it and bought it for me because he knows how much I like the record. Sure enough, in 2005, 2006, I was like, oh, well, let me just do a search. And sure enough, in the click of a button, I find the MP3 of it. And it's just all that time, all those years. And I think that's where you kind of lose that appreciation a little bit for music, because it's so accessible now when there's 30,000 songs going up a day, or plus that on Spotify. It's not, I think, the value, and literally because, back then you're spending as much as $15 for an import vinyl, where now it's all, whether it's streaming for free or $1.99 download on Beatport or whatever. I do miss those days of searching and finding and feeling that sense of accomplishment of I'm the only guy that has this record in town, and I'm going to be playing it, and I'm going to play it for 6 months before it comes out or whatever,
I mean, that to me, that sounds similar to maybe some of what you do now as an A&R at Ultra, right? Because that's also, you're looking for a new sound that nobody's found yet, or you're trying to work with a person that, nobody else is going to work with. Do you think it's that same kind of chase, that discovery?
Absolutely. There's nothing more exciting than discovering a new artist and hearing that first song. And I always call it the what the fuck factor. As soon as you hear it, you're like, what the fuck is this? And you have to find out what it is. And you want to know. And so you hunt down whether it's a song or the artist or whatever. And I've had those moments, and they're great, where you just believe in something because you hear it and you love it, and you want to just be a part of it. And there's been so many times where they're relatively unknown artists. They might have a couple of singles out, and you're just like, I really need to be a part of this. And like, some of the most amazing artists that I've discovered and signed to Ultra have been through that process. So like, even as early as Benny Benassi, Satisfaction, this was like a white label I found in the record store. And the second I heard, I'm like, what is this record? And sure enough, I managed to hunt it down. And, this is again, pre-Shazam and all that. Found out who produced the record and managed to sign him. Even with like Deadmau5, before the Helmet, before the big shows, it was, Joel Zimmerman with he just started the Deadmau5 moniker, and he was doing these records with his partner, his production partner, and it was called BSOD. Met up with him during music conference in Miami, and he handed me 3 CDs, and he's like, "Yeah, here's some of my music." And sure enough, on those 3 CDs, it became like the anthems of Deadmau5 for the next 2 years, from like Faxing Berlin and all these incredible records that were just like, it's just, I love being a part of that. Even Dioro, like the first time I heard the first Dioro record, I'm like, who is this guy? And I tracked him down and signed him. And, we've had a great run with him and continue to. So I think that's the most exciting part of being an A&R. It is finding and discovering the new talent and helping them grow and just watching them kind of bloom,
Yeah, absolutely. And in a second, I want to talk about how you got into that kind of work. But while we're on this topic, how do you find an artist these days? What are your discovery methods, and maybe how have they changed over the years? Because I'm sure sort of finding new sounds and new people to work with in 2021 is a little different than, say, 2001.
Sure. Well, I mean, it's still listening. It's still, connecting with people, talking to people. Data plays a big part in A&R now because, I always joke about how there's a lot of data analysts out there disguised as A&Rs because they're looking at the numbers and they're seeing what's trending. And we use those as tools, and as every A&R should, because you want to know what's working and what's not in your business. But ultimately, it just comes down to hearing it because when you have music that's on Spotify or, on Beatport and they're charting, everyone's seeing that same information. But if you dig a little deeper and you help create those records, that's where it gets super exciting because no one has a formula for that. Sure, you can get this producer with this writer and this artist, but putting the records together, I think, is a lot more exciting than just finding those hit records that are just buzzing that everyone's playing in the club or, that's going viral on the Spotify chart,
Sure. Yeah. So say you find an artist and you really like their sound, but maybe the numbers don't add up. Maybe they don't have good numbers on social media. They don't have a lot of engagement. What is the balance? I mean, first of all, do you ever, just sort of throw the data away and just say, no, this music is too good, I believe in it? What is the balance that you strike there?
Well, I think, there's a difference between being a great producer and a great artist. So sure, there are great producers out there, but it definitely takes something a little more special to become an artist because, you can produce great music, but I think, what does the live show look like? Does he have a manager or not? Is there a reason why the music isn't performing? So there are definitely a lot of components to becoming a great artist. And I think it's not just about the music. You kind of, I don't know, you got to see it, hear it, and feel it, Have
there been artists in your career where you really felt like you took a risk on it? Like it didn't seem like an obvious win, but, you just felt something, you had a hunch that really ended up working out in the end?
Dioro is a perfect example. Dioro's been a great. I mean, I think he's 1 billion streams in on Spotify now, and he just had like one record, like what was called Melbourne Bounce at the time. Just one record that was kind of like popping on a YouTube clip or whatever. From the first time I heard it, I just thought it was distinctive and different. And I think he was one. And even Black Coffee, who's really having a moment now with his new album dropping in a couple of weeks. I signed him close to 5 years ago, and he's been around for a while. He's been around for probably over 10, 12 years at least.
Yeah.
But he's just having his moment now, and it's great to sign these guys when it's early and watch them develop and and really just find their way.
Well, so that leads perfectly into my next question, which is, I think for a lot of people just starting off their career, everybody dreams about getting signed, this big contract. It's a thing you hear about a lot. But what actually, say you find an artist and you like their music and they like you, and you sign a contract and decide to start working together. What happens after that? Because I think a lot of people don't actually understand what the process of building an artist is. You were alluding to it a second ago, talking about putting records together. But, what would that entail? If we just take sort of a blank example artist, say you just sign them, what are the next steps that you would usually follow?
Well, it's really hearing the music. It starts off in A&R, it starts off in the song creation. And it's, helping them, whether it's helping them find a song to work with, or writers to work with, or vocalists to work with, and helping them kind of develop their sound and work with them. But then there are a lot of artists that just deliver great records and you put them out. So it's really case by case. There's no one particular method, Sure.
Yeah. Maybe that's a good way to talk about how you started doing this work in the first place, right? Because we mentioned you came up in New York, you were promoting at these clubs, you eventually started DJing at these clubs quite successfully, the tour life, all of that. When does Ultra enter the picture, and when does starting to work with other artists on their careers and their projects, how does that take form for you?
Yeah, so when I was DJing, this is probably in the late 90s, I was DJing in a club called Twilo. And Twilo was great because it was the first time that a nightclub in New York City was starting to import DJs from outside of the not just the city or the state, but the country. So we had residencies from like Sasha and Digweed and Paul Oakenfold and Paul Van Dyke and Carl Cox and all the kind of international DJs. And so I had my own residency there. It started on Fridays with some of the international DJs. And then I switched over to Saturdays, and I was opening DJ for a DJ called Junior Vasquez, who's like one of the most iconic legends of New York City DJ, of New York City house music. What's funny is that, opening sets, the opening DJ sets, nowadays are like an hour and a half. My opening DJ sets were about 8 hours long. So I would play from like 10 o'clock at night until like 4 o'clock in the morning. And then he would play from 4 in the morning until, probably the next afternoon or evening. So anyway, so when I was playing there, I noticed that, sometimes I was at DMC, this, which was owned by Mixmag, and it was like a remix service. So I was trying to help set up remixes for like really like different kinds of records, just finding exclusive remixes for the vinyl. And one time I found this random record called Flipperty Jip by an artist called Lord Running Clam. And so I gave it to the acapella to one DJ to remix, to Junior actually to remix. And then I think what happened was the acapella leaked, and all of a sudden all these bootlegs and different remixes came out. And I was like, oh, wow, this is something I discovered, and it was really cool. And it was just something that no one heard of. And what I did with it is I turned it into this whole kind of moment of different kinds of music. And I'm like, that's really interesting. And that kind of got the A&R side of me, like creating records and helping kind of people create records, and not just me. And it coincidentally at the time, Patrick Moxey, who's the president of Ultra, he had just started up Ultra, and that was the first release of Ultra was, I think, 96. So it's actually our 25th anniversary this year. And he was, this is about 99. And he was looking for an A&R. So when I was at DMC and Mixmag, I had a colleague who was at Mixmag in the UK. And what happened was Patrick called my colleague, his name was Austin, looking for an A&R based in London. And then so Austin actually called me, and my office was actually about 2 blocks away from Patrick. And he was like, oh, they're looking for an A&R. And Patrick was a VP of A&R at Virgin at the time. So Patrick calls me over at Virgin. He's like, oh, I'm looking for an A&R. And I'm like, oh, that's really cool. And I'm like, oh, I've got an A&R gig at Virgin. This is going to be great. So a couple of interviews down the line. And then at the end, we had just talking about music, and at the very end, he's like, yeah, I wanted to go down to my new startup called Ultra. And I was like, oh, this is not what I expected. But I went down to the office and sure enough, it's like 6 people, stacks and stacks of boxes of records everywhere. And it was just like, a couple of people in the office, just started doing like, compilations. It was more of a compilation label at the time with a couple of vinyl, a little bit of vinyl going on. And it was just interesting times because that was really my first real full-time job into doing a record label. And that's why my life is like pre-Ultra and Ultra, because it's just like that was kind of the separation point.
Well, of course. Yeah. And I mean, I think it's such an interesting time to think about because dance music in 2021, it's something pretty much everybody knows about. It's on the radio. It's a normal thing, a mainstream thing to go to a dance music festival. But in the 90s and, particularly the early to mid 90s, I mean, dance music culture was not at the size that it is now, right? And so hearing you talk about, 6 people in a cramped office, all of that rings very true to me because I started DJing and going to raves in the late 90s. And did it feel to you in those days? I mean, did it feel like you guys kind of, you had a mission, you were trying to bring a sound to the masses? Like, did it feel like a lot of your time was spent just sort of trying to get people to pay attention to it?
Absolutely. Dance music was like the dirty word of the music business. It was like, if you can't make it into other genres of music, you get into dance music. And it was always just kind of the lower level, lower tier. And I remember it was a struggle. We finally got, I think it was called PYM in Miami, the radio station. And we got one record added to the station. And we're like, oh my God, we got a record on radio. And we were concerned about trying to work a second record to that station because we didn't think they were going to play it because it was unheard of.
It's interesting because I think, if we're just looking at the post 2000, so like the last 20 years, there really is that line kind of right in the middle where those first 10 years, it was dance music existed and it was popular, but you were talking about Ultra was putting out compilations and it was maybe just as a whole a little more faceless. And then I sort of feel like once the EDM boom happened, it became so much more artist driven and DJs, becoming rock stars in a way that they hadn't really been in the States, at least, which it must have been an interesting transition point for you guys at Ultra as well, not only going through it, but I mean, actively participating. I feel like you guys helped make that happen.
Yeah, I think, there were a handful of records and it was probably 2008 when it exploded and you named it, EDM. And I think the rebranding of dance music and coining this new term sparked new life into it, even though Lady Gaga, she was a dance artist and it was just dance. And then it was like David Guetta. It was even like Pitbull, I Know You Want Me, which was one of our records that we set up. There were like a handful of these records that all of a sudden these dance records just started going. EDM had something to do with it because it wasn't dance music, it was EDM, and it just became a whole fresh new sound, a new genre,
Almost a whole new subculture in and of itself. I mean, it's interesting, for you coming from the underground roots, right? I mean, if we're talking about these legendary New York clubs, names like Junior Vasquez, and these are legends in the underground. For you, did you always have that pop ear, that side of it to yourself as well? Like, was it a goal for you to sort of bring it mainstream a bit more?
I've never been a fan of pop music, but I always liked music that was a little different. And again, it goes back to if it sounds a little different, I think that's the most important thing. And I think it's not really so much about pop music for me. For some reason, everything I've ever signed, any artist I've ever signed, it's always been very early and they just grow into it. And even like Steve Aoki, he was doing mashups and he was doing these celebrity events and everything. He wasn't like the big festival DJ that he is now. And even Cascade, or I remember when I opened up for Cascade, and it was a little show at a place in the city. It was maybe a 200 cap room. And it was, I remember going out for, meeting up with him before the show. And we're like, oh, it's going to be cool. This is going to be great. And, we went to the show and it was like, about 250 people. And then the funny thing is, we fast forward about 5 years later, and we were recording a shoot for him at the LA Staples Center. This whole concert that he did, it was about 10,000 tickets, and it was the same crew of us in like the green room that were at the bar before the show. And it was just such an amazing moment to see like this artist kind of catapult just into into stardom. From doing these cool underground clubs to like becoming the star that he is.
Well, sure. And seeing the goalposts along the way, right?
But I don't think there's ever a moment that I'm like, this is going to be a hit. It's more like just believing in the artist and, helping them. But I don't think there's ever been like I'm going to sign this one because it's going to have a hit record. It's more like, I just love the music and I want to be a part of it.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, that makes total sense. A thing I talk about a lot with producers on this show is that, anytime you sit down to write a hit, and that's your intention, you're never going to write a hit, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yes, yeah. Exactly the same thing here, I think. It's just interesting because hearing you talk, it sounds like, you don't think of it from either an underground mindset or a mainstream mindset. It's much more just sort of, I like this or I don't like this, which I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's maybe a healthier way to look at it, because there's this sort of dichotomy between underground music and mainstream music, and often they're pitted against each other. But I've always sort of felt that they kind of have a symbiotic relationship. And that, dance music going mainstream doesn't necessarily mean it hurts the underground, or vice versa, right?
Yeah, there's some music that's just meant to live in the underground, and they do phenomenal shows, working with Loco Dice. He's an iconic, a legendary techno DJ, and it's great. I helped get him together with some producers and do his thing. But ultimately, it's always been just great underground techno music. But he'll do, 10,000 tickets in Ibiza, or, do these huge festivals and do big shows. But it's not necessarily music that's going to translate outside the club. And sometimes it's just the best music you'll never remember. It's the best music that you feel in that moment at that time in that club, but you don't necessarily take it home with you, and you're not necessarily listening to it, in a sterile environment on a playlist while studying for a test. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think there's a big separation, I think. And then you have the other artists that are just big streaming numbers, but they can't sell out small shows inside, small 200 or 300 cap rooms, but they'll have millions, hundreds of millions of streams on Spotify. So it's just really interesting, just trying to find that middle ground. And that's why I always say, I don't sign songs, I sign artists, because I always believe in working with the artist, because I think it's just a lot more special than just, signing a song that, is going to be a hit. And I know that's exciting for the company. But I get more into, just working with artists.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you think about the artists you've signed, which there's so many, I don't think we even have time to talk about half of them. But, take, like you mentioned, Steve Aoki, right? And he's somebody who I've known, I've seen the whole journey as well. Like, when you first started working with him, what was he like, and how have you seen him change as an artist over the years?
The most interesting aspect of Steve is that he's never had a specific sound, right? He's a guy that can do a hip hop record. He can do like a trance record. He can do a core EDM record. He can do a trap record. There's never been one. He's never been consistent, but he's always had an edgy kind of grinding kind of sound to his productions. But he's never been really fit into one. He's just an incredible performer, But then again, there's guys like Dioro, and there's I'm working with Carnage, and Carnage is a super authentic artist that can kind of merge in an authentic way hip hop and electronic, right? Yeah. So, so he can do a core EDM record, but then he can work with underground legends like the Martinez brothers and house legend like the Louis Vega. He's a great guy because he's very pure in that sense. He between, working with his first album that we did had like Louis Vert and Migos and I Love McConan and all these incredible rappers. And he always had his finger on the pulse working, finding these guys before they were really popping. And the first album, Papi Gordo, was phenomenal that way because it really blended in a pure way, really core EDM and electronic music with incredible rap. And it's great to hear guys like that.
Yeah. I mean, what's working with a guy like Carnage like? Because he's a buddy of mine, and he's a force of nature. He has a vision. He is generally pretty direct about what he wants and what he's going to do. It's just interesting to think about managing all these different personalities and all these different styles of all the different artists you work with.
Yeah, no, he's great. And again, it goes back to just being authentic, right? He's very authentic. And I think that's why a lot of incredible artists gravitate towards him, because it's pure. It's not like he's trying to be something. He's not trying to go down a lane that, because that's the flavor of the month. He does his thing and people love it. It's just very pure. And that's what I love about Carnage.
Yeah, I think that's right. Did you have a vision for what you were looking for? And maybe we can even say, has that vision changed over time? As far as, are you trying to, set an agenda to promote a certain sound or a certain style or perspective on dance music? Or is it more reactive that when you see someone doing something exciting, you just want to amplify it?
Anytime someone sends me a record, I think this is great for Ultra. And I think that's always actually not what I don't want to hear that. I always tell people, play me something that you just love and play me something that you don't think is right for Ultra, because chances are that might be the one that I'm actually into. Because people, I guess from hearing or, their music in the past, they might have a perception of what they think we would release. And people ask me, what are you looking for? And I'm just looking for interesting music. It doesn't have to fit a specific sound or, fit in a box. It just needs to be different, So I'd rather find and hear music that sounds unlike anything else, as opposed to trying to sound like what's hot at the moment,
Yeah, absolutely. How should an artist approach a label? What's good etiquette? What's a turnoff for you if somebody does something that, is going to make you not want to listen to their music? What's sort of the etiquette there for you?
Well, I try to listen to everything. I think if I hear that it's in the playlist of such and such DJ, that doesn't really impact me. If you're sending music, don't send a link to 25 songs. Maybe narrow it down to like 2 or 3, or, just think if you had your one shot, what would that shot be? I remember getting links and MP3s and everything, I would try to open up every piece of mail I could just to hear, because I always wanted to find, again, it goes back to just hearing something, having a hunch on it. I always wanted to find that one diamond in the rough and just like, and have that moment of like, a random CD or whatever, and hear it and be like, this is the one. But usually what I found over the years is that unsolicited emails just from random people, usually if they made a great song, they can find a better way to deliver it to me. And that's why, like, even the packages, I end up having, like, whether it's a lawyer, manager, an artist, or a producer, someone that I know, they're at the end of the day, it's a very small world, and you can find a way to link, to connect to someone. If you're really good at producing music, you should be able to find a way, or you have a great song that you really believe in. There's probably a better way than emailing info@ultramusic.com. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's what I always thought, that if you're smart enough to make incredible music, you're probably going to be crafty enough to figure out a way to get it into my hands, not just from a random, I got your email from whatever. There's got to be a connection. Usually that works a lot better,
Yeah, I think that's good advice. I mean, you got to do a little homework for, if you spend all this time making this music, you could spend a little time doing a little homework, right?
Yes, yeah. Yeah, I mean, back in the day, it was like, I would have people send me CDs and they didn't even put their email address on the CD. And I'm like, the second I open up, throw out the envelope, and I'm like, okay, put it in. And then, you got to do a little bit of,
Sure.
You're right. You'll be a little crafty. Like
I
that,
I get promos to this day where people haven't tagged the MP3s,
That's definitely a pet peeve, because the second I open up that song and then it goes into my, how many 100,000 songs in my iTunes playlist, it's gone, and it's like, and then if I do happen to like it and it happens, I just playing something on shuffle or whatever, and all of a sudden it comes up and it's just the title of a song. And I'm like, oh, I actually like this. But it's as good as gone, you know?
Yeah, 100%. The same thing has happened to me. Yep. Absolutely. So, talking about the first time you hear an artist and that moment, that exciting moment of discovery, have you had any white whales where you had that moment and wanted to work with somebody and just weren't able to make it happen for whatever reason?
In the very beginning of Ultra, there was a record called We Like to Party by Venga Boys. And the reality is, I'm like, oh my God, this is the worst record I've ever heard. I hate it. Because also back then, I think my DJ taste really drove my A&R skills, right? If I liked it as a DJ, I wanted to sign it. And if I could play in the club, I would want to sign it. So I was like, oh, this isn't, it's just not my thing. So I don't mean it's bad. It's just not my taste. Right. And sure enough, that became just a mega, mega, mega anthem. That's when I realized that sometimes if I really dislike a record, I think it's going to do really well.
Right. Well, that's absolutely right. Because art, if any art, and I will be generous and say Venga Boys' art is,
it has to cause, again, it goes back to the reaction. It has to cause a reaction, whether it's making you whether it makes you nauseous or it gets you it gives you the chills. Oh my God, this is atrocious. But there's something there, because if you don't have a reaction in music, again, your white noise, your wallpaper, just sitting in between the records and in between the music, and you're never going to get noticed. If you're just trying to sound like a pop record, like everything else, what's the point? Because there's too much of it out there, and you got to stand out.
Talking about all these names you've worked with, I kind of just want to real quick just bounce around a couple names, just throw them at you, see if whatever comes to mind, whether it's the story or the first time you met them or the first time you heard their music. Let's start, they're all legends, but let's start with the legend Armand Van Helden.
Armand Van Helden, wow. When I was a resident DJ at a club called Liquid in Miami, and Liquid was like the hot nightclub. It was on Espanola and Washington, and it was, this is like the late '90s, and you'd have at the big actors at the time, like whether it's Bruce Willis, and you'd have Madonna come by, and all the celebrities. Prince was coming by back when he was, rest in peace. When I think that was the moment when it was like, he had those crazy, it was Tori Amos' Professional Widow, it was CJ Boland, it was Sugar Sweeter, it was Sneaker Pimps. Like, there were so many incredible records from Armand. And I think that for some reason, Armand, it brings me back to it was 96, 97. And it was that was like that pinnacle of my Miami nightlife career. Was Armand. He played an important part of it. I don't really have a personal relationship with him. We've released music with Armand, but it brings back, it's more nostalgia.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's appropriate for him too, because he's someone who has managed to stay, certainly relevant, but stay innovating while still, all his new music still sounds nostalgic to me. You know what I mean?
Yep.
And I think that's a really special thing. What about a person like David Guetta?
David Guetta, yeah. David's incredible. We did his Pop Life album. I guess this is, again, before it was EDM and it was dance music. And the major labels didn't really want to really be a part of dance music in the early 2000s. And so we met with David, Patrick and I, in Miami, and talked about doing some music together, releasing some of his music, because his label at the time didn't really do much with it in America. And sure enough, the first big record we had, which was his first top 40 record in America, was called Love Is Gone. And that was one of the first big records we got into Z100 and all the big top 40 stations. It's great because it gave me a little bit of a relationship with him. And I ended up opening up for him at we did parties with him at Cielo and Pasha and a few different places, and I would be the opening DJ for him. So that was fun. That was great.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And with Love Is Gone and having that kind of, that radio hit, not just a hit, but a big radio hit, was that one of the first times that it happened for Ultra? Like, were there...
That was a big one. I think it was around the same time. I think there was between that and then again, Pitbull, I Know You Want Me. And then we had also another artist called Inor that had a record called Calabria, which had a big saxophone riff in it. I'm sure you're familiar with it. So I think it was those three records. Calabria and Pitbull, I Know You Want Me were probably a little bigger than Love Is Gone. But no, actually, they were all in the same kind of pool of... this is when we realized, okay, this is crossing over. This is getting big now, because those were all within the same. I think it was 2007, 2008, and we had a couple of big records back then.
When that happened at the time, was it a surprise, or had it been something you guys had really been trying to make happen at the time?
Well, we're always trying to get hit records and try to make hit records, but I remember. The first week, you look at SoundScan back then, you look at see what your first week sales are of records, of CDs and downloads. And I remember when we first released Pitbull, I Know You Want Me. And I want to say like the first week, it was like 20,000 downloads, or it was a big number. And I think that was the biggest first week we ever had of a single. And it's exciting because that's when, Pitbull, I Know You Want Me, but prior to that record, it's another interesting story with that one. We had this Calabria record, right? The Calabria. And he was doing a record called The Anthem, and it had the same sax riff in it. And both records were kind of competing for airtime. So neither one of them went all the way number one. But, some stations were playing The Anthem, some stations were playing Calabria. And I was like, well, who is this guy? Because before that, he was just doing rap, right? And that was kind of his first kind of more dancing, rhythmic record. So I was like, well, what do I do? How do I get in touch with this guy, Pitbull? So I called my friend Cedric Gervais, who was on the label at the time. And Cedric's studio happened to be in the same studio as Pitbull.
Oh, sure.
And so I was like, what's going on? Like, can you get me his number? He's like, sure. And Cedric gave me Pitbull's number. And I just called him. I'm like, look, you got this record. I got this one. Let's do something together. And he's like, all right, let's do it. And within 2 weeks, I know it was a beat. We had this instrumental beat called 75 Brazil Street.
Right.
And then he turned around, I Know You Want Me within like 2 weeks. And then we're like, okay, this is going to be, who knew? Because that was a very simple record. But it was all hook. There was no real crazy verses. It was all like 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. It was I Know You Want Me. There were just so many. It was just hook after hook after hook.
Absolutely.
And that was like the first exciting record that we had that really crossed over to beyond US, but also internationally.
Well, and it's interesting to think about the ripple effects of something like that too, because to hear that you just called up Pitbull and it was, that simple.
Just random.
Yeah,
random moments.
But then
those are the ones though.
But then look at what he did afterwards. I mean, I feel like he went so hard on that lane that, it makes me wonder if you hadn't called him when you did, what would his career, would he be making those kinds of records? It's really interesting to think about those little moments.
It is. And it's always the random moments like that. Even like, I remember going a few years later, but with Omi Cheerleader. And, we had a reggae record called Cheerleader. And we're like, well, we need to get a deep house remix of it because that was starting to pop. And we're like, whoa, here's this guy walking the streets called Felix Jan in Germany. Let's get him to remix this record. Okay, sure. And it just, it's always these moments that you have that no one can predict it. You can try to put the biggest writer with the biggest producer with the biggest artist, but it's always those kind of special moments that are just like it's just random and it's like the stars align.
Sure.
It's a great feeling.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And especially it's got to be a great feeling too because there's no bigger plan than what you just said, right? It's just something you do in the moment, and then it ends up. You look back on it, and it looks like this genius, this lightning strike of genius. But at the time, it just feels like, well, this, this seems like a good idea. Let's try this out. Yeah. It's interesting. So when I knew I was coming to talk to you, I was looking at, your background and looking at some old articles about you and all that. And I found this interesting quote from Octa, who I don't know if you know her, but she's a fantastic DJ. And
I saw that recently. Yes.
Yeah.
Very flattering.
Right. Yeah. She said that, the first mix CD she ever bought was one of yours. It was one of the Ultra compilation mix CDs, and that was hugely formative for her. And she sort of thought that maybe set her on the path. And it's those kind of ripples that are really interesting to me, because that's, probably something you made 10 years ago that,
at least.
that I have to assume, you probably haven't thought about in a while, but then years down the road, it affects another artist at a different time in their life.
I was so passionate about doing these Ultra compilations, especially Ultra Electro and Ultra Chilled. Those were, like we had the first disc, which was like, you put the big hits and what's hot at the moment. And then you have the second disc, which was more like the really cool stuff. And I loved mixing those. They were just so much fun. And it was like, I do have every once in a while, I have people come to me like, I remember this moment or this CD and I think even like there was a Wikipedia page about like having the most entries in electronic music on Billboard. One of my, like I was listed as one of them because of all these ultra compilations. So it's kind of fun.
Yeah, that's great.
Those played a big part in the growth of Ultra, the compilation series, whether it's Ultra Dance, Ultra Trance, Ultra Chilled, Ultra Electro. That's how kind of like we built our brand in the very beginning.
Sure. And you tell me if this is a reach, but I was looking at those and looking at the different editions of them, Chilled, Weekend, Electro. It occurred to me that you guys sort of predicted the playlisting paradigm that we're now all in with, Spotify's playlists of, very separated genres and styles and moods. You guys were doing that a decade or more beforehand.
Yeah, I think we're doing number 20 or 21 or 22 coming out next month, actually.
Wow.
So it's been annual. So we were trying to, at one point, I think we were doing about 6 of them a year. I think it was starting in 2001. So they were great. Great series.
Yeah. 100%. I mean, I definitely had many of them early on as well. I mean, you mentioned Ultra's turning 25 years old, which is a crazy number to hear. What keeps you here? What are you still excited about? What's the most fun part of what you do 25 years into this game?
I live, eat, breathe, sleep, not just music, but electronic music. As long as, as long as I could remember, it's just always just been some kind of electronic music and rhythmic too. I was actually just going through some of the classic records, classic songs that, before I got into electronic music. And I remember they all had one similar component, which was the BPM. Most of the songs that I listened to growing up all were in like a more up-tempo range. And I always thought, like, I kind of look back at that, I'm like, wow. And when whether it's like Depeche Mode or Smiths or all the alternative stuff I was listening to, the songs I typically gravitated towards were more up-tempo. And it's just funny how I'm like, oh, maybe I should do a remix of this or a bootleg of that or cover this. And because it's all in that same kind of rhythm of one anywhere from 115 to like 125, 130,
Yeah. That's interesting to hear you say, because that's sort of how you first got known, right? Was these bootlegs you were making. I saw it was like 9 Inch Nails, Queen, Beck, all these sort of influential artists in the 80s and 90s. And to think about that from the lens of what you just said, that, it's a common tempo. It's about the energy, connecting all of it. That actually makes a lot of sense to me, thinking about your current job, where you're signing people who make wildly different sounds and styles of music, but there is this sort of shared energy, this shared aesthetic to it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And as we're kind of wrapping it up here, the last year for anybody in the music industry has been interesting, to say the least. And I think we've all had to make a lot of adjustments, no matter what side of the business we're on. How has your experience been, working through the pandemic? Have you still been, finding new artists? Have you guys been operating as much as normal as you've been able to? What has the pandemic been like for you?
Yeah, I'm grateful that the company it's well. First of all, Patrick's a legend, and he's an incredible boss, and incredible president of the company, and keeps everyone really on top of their game, and I think keeps everyone positive. It's always been a great company to work for, but I think even more now than ever, because we're seeing that despite us everyone working at home, we're able to work at full capacity. We've gotten into a groove that we're able to kind of continue to do what we do. So I'm very grateful for that. But I think from the label, what's really interesting is, a lot of the producers and artists that we've been working with, we're touring 300 dates a year, or on the road constantly. And now with that gone, they're focused so much on music, so there's been a lot more creativity, a lot more content coming out that wasn't before, because there just wasn't enough time for it. So I think it separates the touring brands and the performers from the actual artists, because there are some guys they're just delivering the same amount of records that they were when they were on the road. And then there's some that are just like, I'm seeing like every couple of weeks, all of a sudden there's just new music coming. You can really see the real artist kind of creative output flowing now, because that's all they're doing. I don't know who the first person to come up with it was, but who was the first guy to say that EDM producers have been preparing for this all their lives by locking themselves up in the studio and just recording by themselves?
Yeah.
So they've been preparing for it.
Is there anything you're working on right now? Any artists, any songs, just anything you're really excited about that's on your mind?
Yeah, I'm very excited. Like, there's a new act. They're based in Sicily called Jolie and Asia. Why I was so intrigued from them is because they built this incredible YouTube channel that's, I think when I first met them, they were at maybe 400,000 subscribers on their channel, which is massive.
Yeah.
And I think now a year later, it's 700 or 750,000 subscribers. And they've always had incredible YouTube performance videos of them performing in these really beautiful kind of landscapes, whether it's Mount Etna, I think in Sicily, or, all these different kind of beautiful backgrounds. And very excited with what's going on with them. Another new artist that I've been working with is Gattuso. And he's been incredible, because every song that we've been putting out has continued to grow. So I'm very excited about him as well. Super excited about Carnage being back on the label. We worked with him on an album about 5 years ago, and now we're working on another album. I'm hoping that touring comes back soon. Seeing the random tour dates here and there. I was just talking to someone in Australia who was saying that they're starting to do shows again, because they've been very diligent about COVID and being protective of everything. I know throughout Asia, it's been a lot easier, because they've been very strict with the quarantine. So they've been able to do maskless festivals, which, I can't even imagine. But it's great to know that, I know Carnage was there, and there's a bunch of our guys that were there a couple of weeks ago doing shows, and they were strict about 4B was there, I think, a couple of weeks ago as well. That stayed in the hotel for 2 weeks, and then once they're out. And I was even talking to one of the artists that were like, look, I changed my flight 5 times because I don't want to go back. I can go to a restaurant. I can just do whatever I want and not even think about it, because it's cool.
Yep.
So I'm hoping that, I think there's a light at the end of the tunnel for us, and I'm hoping it comes soon. But we'll see,
Yeah, same here, man. Same here. First of all, thank you for doing this, man. I hope you had a good time. This was really fun. I'm just going to ask you one last question. It's the same question I ask at the end of each one of these interviews. Just looking for a moment in your life, a memory, could be from any time, when you're a kid, 5 minutes ago, anytime, when in a single moment, music really deeply affected you, really had a deep impact on you. And that's meant to be a super broad question. There's no wrong answer.
Wow. When I was a teenager, listening to the Smiths, and it was just it was a ballad called Please, Please, Please Let Me Get What I Want.
Yeah.
And it has nothing to do with electronic music, right? But I was walking in the winter, and it was snowing, and I was trying to go to high school, and I was walking through the snow, and it was just one of these moments that it was just I don't know, it just fit the moment. It was like the soundtrack for that very moment, and it moved me, right? And it was and that's when I realized I didn't know what I wanted to do. I just wanted to be a part of it. And that was like kind of, I think the very beginning the start of me, like trying to discover ways to be a part of music, just not knowing how. And, back then it was like either you're a lawyer, a doctor, a teacher. Like there was you don't go to school for music business. You just you fall into the music business because you couldn't do something else,
I mean, yeah, let's be honest.
But now it's like, of course it's a full-fledged career and there's great courses and great schools and everything. It's incredible now. And I encourage my son to be a part of it. He loves music. He's like my little A&R scout now. He's not so little, he's 14, but he's got an incredible set of ears and he's discovering music for me. So it's great to have like, a kid whose ears are in the street, because at a street level, you really hear what they're listening to organically and how they discover it. So, having an 11 and a 14-year-old, it's great to discover music again, in a very pure sense, in a very organic way.
Yeah. I mean, first of all, that's just great free labor, right?
Yeah, exactly. Oh, I told them I'll give them a little extra bonus for their allowance if they find something that I can sign.
Yeah. but yeah, what I love about what you said is that, you talked about that moment for yourself, listening to the Smiths in the winter, and it's sort of being the soundtrack you didn't know you needed. And, then seeing that experience again through the eyes of your children. I mean, that's what we're all looking for, right? That's why all of us stay working in music, deal with all the stress and the weirdness that is the music industry is for moments like that. I think that's a beautiful story, man.
Absolutely. And I think, there's so many times when you discover a song for the first time in a nightclub and you remember that moment. I remember 1993 or 94, it was like an artist called Christine W. and it was called Feel What You Want. And I remember vividly the exact time when I heard this song for the first time. And there's so many times when you just that moment, and yet again, it goes back to being around with your friends, and I don't know what it is. There's something that it's stamped into your brain that whenever I hear songs for the first time in a specific environment, I'll just remember that moment forever, and going back to the Smiths.
Yeah. Oh, 100%. And, now not only do you get to sort of chase that moment over and over, but you get to create it, hopefully, for other people, right?
Well, I hope so. That's why I love it. I hope that that other people experience it for the first time the same way I did,
Yeah, 100%, man. Well, I think that's a great note to end it on. I don't think I could say it better than that.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, man.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. It's been a pleasure.
Good. Yeah, it's been great to have you, man. You're welcome back anytime.
All right. Thanks, Willy. Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Right. Yep. Bye.
All right, that's the show. Shout out to David Waxman. Great to have you on, man. Thanks for coming on the show. That was great. For everybody out there listening, I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. Like I said at the top of the show, there's a link in the description of this episode to go hit up Ultra Music. Keep up to date with everything they're dropping, whether it's releases from some of your favorite artists or brand new artists that you've never even heard of. Ultra Music, with the track record that they have, you might as well just go for the ride, man. David is always hard at work, and as you just heard in that conversation, they're working on a lot of exciting projects. You can also follow me, keep up to date with me. My name is @Willy Joy or @BackToBackPod on all social media. BackToBackPod@gmail.com is the email address. Or if you want the best way to get in touch with me, you can always just come join the Back to Back Discord. The link for the Discord is also in the description of this episode. It's a great group of folks, man. You got to come join up, and that is the best way to get in touch with me. I'm in there all the time. So if you got something to say, you got a question to ask, come ask it on the Discord. Talk to me there, and then we will be best friends forever. I hope everybody out there is doing well. I love you all. I got a lot more exciting episodes coming up for you in the next couple months. But until then, be good. Have a good week, and I will talk to you guys next Tuesday. For Back to Back, this is Willy Joy. Peace.